She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't even cry. When they dragged her into that room, wrists bound, dress torn, her husband's blood still drying on her hands, she simply knelt on the cold stone floor and waited to die. And every single person in that chamber was ready to let her.
The jury has reached
The
a
evidence
verdict.
was airtight.
On the charge of
The
murder,
room had
we
been
find the
locked from the
defendant
inside.
guilty.
No one
The
else
sentence
was
will
present.
be pronounced tomorrow.
She hadn't denied a thing. As far as the court was concerned, Lady Eleanor Ashford was a murderer, and by dawn she would hang for it. But then Lord Commissioner Harlan Graves walked in, a man who had never hesitated, never second-guessed, who had already signed her execution order that very morning. And something stopped him cold. Not her silence, not her confession, her arms, old bruises, faded scars. Marks that had absolutely nothing to do with the night her husband died. And in that single frozen moment, the question changed completely. It was no longer, did she kill him? It became, what did he do to her first? And more chilling than that, how many people knew and said nothing? Here is what I need you to sit with before we go any further. If you were standing in that room, execution order in hand, and you saw those scars, would you have paused? Or would you have looked away like everyone else did for 8 years? Drop your answer in the comments. There is no wrong response. But your answer will tell you something important about yourself. And before I take you inside that locked room and show you everything that was hidden, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell right now, because this story does not just ask whether Eleanor deserves to live. Now tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know who is in the room with us tonight. Let's begin. She did not ask for mercy. That was the first thing Lord Commissioner Harlan Graves noticed when they brought Eleanor Ashford into the inquest chamber. Most did. Even the guilty ones, especially the guilty ones, arrived with pleas already forming on their lips, with explanations and excuses, and the particular kind of desperate performance that came from people who still believed their survival depended on being believed. Eleanor Ashford arrived the way a woman arrives who has already made her peace with the worst possible outcome. Wrists bound before her. Dress torn at the sleeve, stained with something dark that had dried to rust. Hair loose, which in itself was a kind of indictment in 1847. A respectable woman did not appear in public undone, and the disorder of her appearance was being read by every person in that room as evidence of the disorder within her. She walked to the centre of the chamber without being guided. She did not look at the magistrates. She did not look at the crowd gathered in the gallery above, the neighbours and society acquaintances and curious strangers who had come to watch Lord Edmund Ashford's murderer face justice. She looked at no one. She knelt on the cold stone floor, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she waited. Lord Commissioner Harlan Graves had presided over 14 inquest hearings in 7 years. He had seen grief performed and grief genuine. He had seen guilt disguised as innocence, and innocence so bewildered by accusation that it looked exactly like guilt. He had seen women weep strategically, and women weep without realizing they were weeping at all. He had never seen a woman who looked like she simply did not expect to survive this, and had already decided that survival was beside the point. He picked up the file before him. The facts, as reported, were these. Lord Edmund Ashford, 43 years of age, Member of Parliament, respected landowner, well regarded by his peers, had been found dead in the locked study of Ashford House at 7 o'clock on the morning of November the 4th. A letter opener, monogrammed, silver, belonging to the household, had been driven into his chest with sufficient force to pierce his heart. He had been dead for some hours before discovery. His wife, Lady Eleanor Ashford, had been found unconscious on the floor beside him when the household steward finally broke the lock after receiving no response to repeated knocking. The room had been locked from the inside. There had been no forced entry. There was no other person present. Lady Ashford had not denied being present. She had not, in fact, said very much at all. Harlan set the file down. He studied the woman kneeling before him, the woman who had been brought here to be sentenced rather than tried, because the case was considered self-evident. He was here as a formality, to make the execution order official before it was carried up to London for confirmation. He had been told this would take 20 minutes. Something made him not speak immediately. It was not her silence. Silence could be calculated. It was something in the quality of it, the specific exhaustion of a person who has been silent for a very long time, not because they have nothing to say, but because they have learned that saying it changes nothing. He had seen that quality before. He had seen it in men who had survived warfare and come home to find that no one wanted the full truth of it. He had never expected to see it in a well-dressed woman kneeling on the floor of an inquest chamber in Devonshire. "Lady Ashford," he said. She did not flinch at his voice. She raised her eyes to him with the measured care of someone who had learned to control every visible reaction. "You have been charged with the murder of your husband, Lord Edmund Ashford. Do you understand the nature of the charge?" "I do." Her voice was steady, not the steadiness of someone who felt nothing, the steadiness of someone who was holding something very carefully in place. "You were found in the locked room where your husband died. You have offered no explanation for his death. The evidence before this court indicates that no other person could have been present." He paused. "Do you deny responsibility for Lord Ashford's death?" A beat. The entire room leaned forward. "No," she said. "Not I didn't do it. Not you must understand. Not let me explain. Simply no." She did not deny it. The crowd above murmured. Harriet Cleeve, Edmund's sister, let out a sound from the gallery that was half sob, half satisfaction. The two magistrates flanking Harlan exchanged glances that meant the same thing. "There. Done. Let's proceed." Harlan did not proceed. He was looking at her hands, specifically at the way she held them, folded, yes, bound at the wrists, yes, but the position was not natural. She was holding them in a way that kept the inside of her forearms turned slightly away from view. It was a subtle thing, the kind of adjustment a person made without thinking, because they had spent a long time making it. "Remove the binding," Harlan said. The guard nearest him looked uncertain. "My Lord Commissioner, she has not—" "Remove it!" The guard moved forward and unwound the cord from her wrists. Eleanor Ashford did not resist. She kept her hands in her lap, still folded, still turned. "Lady Ashford," Harlan said quietly, "show me your arms." She went very still. "This is not a request to humiliate you. I am asking because I believe something important has been overlooked, and I will not proceed with this hearing until I have satisfied myself on the matter. Show me your arms." She looked at him for a long moment. He thought she was deciding something, not whether to obey. She had moved well past the point of resistance. She was deciding whether his concern was real or whether it was another kind of trap. Whether this man, like all the others, would look and then look away. Slowly, she turned her hands over. She drew her sleeves back to the elbow. Harlan Graves had spent 7 years in law. Before that, he had served as an army surgeon for 3 years in the campaigns before Waterloo, before a shoulder injury had redirected him toward the courts. He knew what violence left on a body. He knew the difference between the marks of a single struggle and the marks of something sustained. He knew how bruises aged, the yellow-green of old damage, the deep purple of the recent, the particular silvery white of a scar that had closed without proper care. Eleanor Ashford's arms told a history that had nothing to do with one night in a locked room. The chamber was very quiet. Harlan became aware that his hands had gone still on the desk before him, that the two magistrates flanking him were no longer exchanging confident glances, that the guard who had removed her bindings was staring at the floor with the particular expression of a man who wishes he were somewhere else. "This proceeding is suspended," Harlan said. Harriet Cleeve stood up in the gallery. "My Lord Commissioner, this proceeding is suspended pending a full medical review and a complete reinvestigation of the circumstances surrounding Lord Ashford's death." He kept his voice level. He did not look at the gallery. He looked at Eleanor Ashford, who was staring at him with an expression he would spend many nights afterward trying to name. It was not relief. It was too cautious for relief. It was the expression of a person who has heard a sound that might be rescue, or might be another kind of danger, and has not yet determined which. Lady Ashford will be moved to supervised quarters in the east wing of this building. She will not be restrained. She will be provided with a physician of my choosing. He rose. "This court will reconvene when I am satisfied that justice has been properly informed." The noise from the gallery rose to something near chaos. Harlan did not stay to hear it. He gathered his papers and walked out of the chamber, and he did not let himself think about the expression on Eleanor Ashford's face until he was alone in the corridor, where he stopped walking and stood with one hand flat against the cold stone wall, and understood that the next few weeks would require him to dismantle something that a great number of powerful people had a great deal of interest in keeping intact. He had suspended a proceeding. He had delayed an execution order that bore his own signature. He could still feel the shape of the marks on her arms from across the room. He pushed himself away from the wall and went to find a physician who could be trusted to tell the truth. Dr. Constance Aldridge arrived at Ashford House Inquest Building before noon, which Harlan thought said something about her character. He had sent the summons at 9 in the morning with a message that contained only the barest facts. Female prisoner. Medical examination required. Full documentation needed. Confidentiality essential. Most physicians would have waited until afternoon. Dr. Aldridge, who had been practicing medicine for 11 years, despite the considerable obstacles the profession placed before women, arrived in under 3 hours, carrying a battered leather bag and an expression that suggested she had already made several preliminary assessments on the journey. "Lord Commissioner," she said, settling into the chair across his desk with the ease of someone who was not particularly impressed by offices. "Your message was deliberately uninformative. I did not want to predispose your examination with my own interpretations." A refreshing approach. She studied him briefly. "What can you tell me that is factual rather than interpretive?" Lady Eleanor Ashford, 31 years of age, married to Lord Edmund Ashford for 8 years. Found unconscious in a locked room with her husband's body 4 days ago. Has not denied being present. Has offered no explanation. Harlan paused. "When I asked her to show me her arms this morning, I found evidence of injuries that could not have resulted from a single event." Constance's expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes. A sharpening, a recognition. "How extensive?" "I am not a physician, but I was a surgeon's assistant for 3 years, and I know what sustained damage looks like." "And the physician who examined her initially?" "Dr. Frederick Stowe. His report contains 2 paragraphs. The first describes Lord Ashford's cause of death in considerable detail. The second describes Lady Ashford's condition in 4 sentences and concludes that her injuries were consistent with the altercation resulting in Lord Ashford's death. Constance was quiet for a moment. Was Dr. Stowe acquainted with Lord Ashford? They were members of the same club. They dined together on at least 4 occasions in the past year, according to the household records. I see. She picked up her bag. I would like to see Lady Ashford now. They walked together through the building's east corridor, their footsteps measured against stone. She may refuse, Harlan said. I have instructed the guards that her refusal is to be honoured without consequence. Constance glanced at him sideways. You expect her to refuse? I expect her to be cautious about allowing strangers to examine her body. Given what I suspect about her history, that caution is entirely rational. A pause. You are not what I expected, Constance said. What did you expect? A man more interested in resolving the case efficiently than in examining what the case actually contains. I was, Harlan said. I had signed the execution order before I entered that chamber. I expected to take 20 minutes. They stopped outside the door to Eleanor Ashford's temporary quarters. And now? Constance asked. And now I need to understand what I was about to sign. Eleanor was standing when they entered. She had been standing at the window, which overlooked a narrow courtyard filled with grey November sky and the bare arms of a single elm tree. She turned when she heard the door, and Harlan watched her take in the sight of a woman carrying a medical bag with a kind of cautious recalibration. The guard she had put up faltering slightly in the face of something unexpected. Lady Ashford, Harlan said. This is Dr. Constance Aldridge. She is a physician. I have asked her to conduct a medical examination, but you are not required to submit to it. You may refuse, and nothing will be done to compel you. This is a choice entirely yours to make. Eleanor looked at Constance. You are a physician. I am. I trained in Edinburgh. I have been practicing in Exeter for 11 years. Constance's voice was calm and matter-of-fact. I am here because Lord Commissioner Graves believes you have not been properly examined, and because I believe that a woman's injuries are best documented by someone who will not find it convenient to look elsewhere. A long silence. The physician who examined me before, Eleanor said carefully. He was Lord Ashford's friend. I have never met Lord Ashford, Constance said. I have no interest in his reputation. My interest is in what happened to you and in documenting it accurately. Eleanor stood very still, and Harlan could see the calculus happening, the weighing of risk against risk, the assessment of this woman's face for the tells that meant danger. Whatever she found or did not find, she turned to the window briefly, then turned back. You may examine me, she said. Harlan moved to the far side of the room, facing the wall. He could hear the quiet exchange behind him. Constance's calm instructions, the soft sounds of fabric, Eleanor's breathing measured and controlled. He studied the elm tree in the courtyard, and he kept his hands loose at his sides, and he waited. Constance worked in near silence. He heard her voice occasionally. May I? And tell me if this hurts, and how long ago? And he heard Eleanor's replies, which were brief and low, and preceded by the particular pause of someone who is deciding precisely how much truth they can afford to release. When Constance finally said, Thank you, Lady Ashford. I have everything I need. Her voice had changed. It was still professional. But something beneath it had gone tight and still. The way a person's voice goes when they are containing something they will express later in private. Harlan turned. Eleanor had dressed again. She stood by the window once more, her arms folded across her chest, not defensively, protectively, like someone who has just been asked to display the evidence of their worst years and is now putting themselves back together one layer at a time. "Is there anything you need?" Harlan asked. She looked at him with that same unreadable assessment. "You keep asking me that." "Because I keep meaning it." "Meaning and doing are different things, Lord Commissioner." "I am aware." He held her gaze. "I intend to do, Lady Ashford, but I need your patience while I do it properly." Her expression shifted, a fraction, barely perceptible. Not trust. The first tentative measurement of whether trust might eventually be possible. "I will be patient," she said, and returned her gaze to the elm tree. In the corridor, Constance Aldridge stood with her back against the wall and her bag held in both hands, and her eyes closed for a moment that had nothing professional in it. Then she opened them and looked at Harlan and said, 8 years. He said nothing. The scarring alone spans at least 5 years. Some of it is older. The bruising on her ribs shows multiple fractures that healed without setting. Someone who was hurt and did not receive treatment, or was told the treatment was unnecessary. Her left wrist has a slight irregular thickness from an old break. The recent injuries are consistent with a violent struggle. Yes. But they are layered over a history that has nothing to do with a single night in a locked room. Harlan's jaw was tight. Dr. Stowe saw this. Any physician who examined her properly would have seen this. You cannot miss it. Constance's voice was precise and furious in equal measure. The question is not whether Dr. Stowe saw it. The question is what he chose to put in his report. What is your assessment of what happened? Constance was quiet for a moment. I will tell you what the evidence tells me. A woman who has been systematically harmed over a period of years was found in a locked room with her husband. The injuries consistent with a recent struggle are present, but they are superimposed on years of prior damage. She met his eyes. I cannot tell you how Lord Ashford died. I can tell you that Lady Ashford has been living with violence for a very long time, and that the magistrates who were prepared to sentence her this morning had either not examined her at all or had chosen not to report what they found. I need your full findings in writing. Every injury, every estimated age, everything. I will have it for you by tomorrow morning. Thank you, Dr. Aldridge. She began to move toward the exit, then stopped. Lord Commissioner? She looked back at him. She didn't ask me to be careful. She didn't ask me to be discreet. She didn't ask me anything at all. A pause. She has been asking for help for a long time and being told no. I think she has stopped believing that asking does anything. Harlan said nothing. He looked at the closed door to Eleanor's quarters and thought about a woman who had walked into a sentencing chamber without asking for mercy, and understood for the first time that it was not resignation. It was the entirely rational response of someone who had learned that mercy was not available to her. He went to find the household records for Ashford House. The records were in a room off the main administrative office, stored in 3 leather-bound volumes that covered the years of Edmund Ashford's tenancy. Harlan worked through them methodically, alone, in the particular silence of a man who is looking for something he half hopes not to find. He found it in the physician's records first. Dr. Stowe had visited Ashford House on 14 occasions in 8 years. The notations were brief. A winter fever, a riding injury, a persistent cough, household matters attended to. 3 entries mentioned Lady Ashford by name. One noted that she had sustained bruising from a fall on the stairs. One noted a minor head injury from the same cause. One, dated 3 years earlier, noted nervous exhaustion, prescribed rest and restricted social activity, discussed management with Lord Ashford. Nervous exhaustion, restricted social activity. Harlan set the volume down and moved to the household accounts, staff records, letters of reference. In 8 years, Ashford House had employed 37 servants. The average tenure was 14 months. The household for a property of that size, in Harlan's experience, should have maintained a stable core staff for years at a time. The turnover here was extraordinary. He went through the records of dismissal. Most contained no reason. Several were marked dismissed without character, the professional death sentence for a servant, given for transgressions serious enough that the employer refused to provide a reference. He counted 11 such notations in 8 years, 11 servants dismissed without character, their livelihoods destroyed, their ability to find future employment severely compromised, no reasons given. He found a pattern. The dismissals clustered. 3 in the year following the marriage, 2 more in the 3rd year, 4 in the 5th and 6th years combined. And then, in the past 2 years, very few, because by then he suspected the staff who remained had learned what was required of them. He began pulling the names and tracing them through the county records. It took him the better part of the afternoon. By evening, he had located 7 of the 11 dismissed without character servants and sent urgent messages requesting their willingness to speak with him. He was not certain any of them would respond. The threat of blacklisting was powerful. Dismissed without character followed a servant the way a criminal record followed a gentleman, theoretically indefinitely, practically for the rest of their working life. The first response came before he had finished eating. A woman named Agnes Tully, who had been dismissed from Ashford House 5 years ago after 11 months of service, was now working as a laundress in Exeter. She wrote in a hand that was careful and deliberate, the hand of someone who had taught themselves to write and was proud of it. "I will speak. I have been waiting for someone to ask." The second response came the next morning, from a man named Samuel Holt, who had been Edmund Ashford's head footman for 2 years and had been dismissed without character in the 5th year of the marriage. He had found work eventually as a coachman in Bristol. His note was shorter. When and where? By the end of the 2nd day, 5 of the 7 had agreed to speak. Harlan arranged for them to travel to Exeter under his own financial authority. He did not want to use the official court resources yet, not until he had a clearer picture of what he was building and who might try to dismantle it. He visited Eleanor Ashford each evening. The visits were brief, and he told her exactly what he was doing. Not the details, not the names, but the shape of it. "I am looking at the household records. I am speaking to people who worked in your home." He watched her face for the things she could not quite control. The slight intake of breath when he mentioned a name, the stillness that passed over her features when he described something that confirmed what she already knew to be true. She did not tell him anything, not yet. But on the 3rd evening, as he was leaving, she said, "There is a woman named Agnes. She was dismissed for speaking to me without permission." He stopped at the door. "I know." She looked at him. "You found her?" "I found her. She has agreed to speak to me." Eleanor turned back to the window. Outside, the elm tree had shed its last leaves in an overnight wind and stood bare and black against the November dusk. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to stay still to hear it. "I tried to warn her," she said. "Before he dismissed her, I tried to tell her not to draw his attention. She brought me a cup of tea without being asked one afternoon when he was away from the house. She saw something. She had heard something, I think, some argument from the previous evening. And she brought me tea, and she sat with me for 10 minutes without any authorization to do so. I told her it was kind, but that she should not do it again, that he would find out, and that he would not forgive it. A pause. He found out. He dismissed her 2 days later. She had been with us for almost a year. Harlan stood very still. I never knew if she understood that I had tried to protect her. I never had the chance to explain. He made certain of that. "I will tell her," Harlan said. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "It will not undo anything." "No, but it might mean something to her." He left her there in the lamplight, and he stood in the corridor for a moment with his hand on the door, and thought about a woman who had been carefully erasing every connection between herself and safety for 8 years, and who still, amid all of it, had tried to protect a servant she barely knew. Agnes Tully arrived in Exeter on a Thursday, wearing a coat that had been mended twice at the elbows and carrying herself with the cautious determination of someone who has decided to do something they know will cost them, but has made peace with the cost. She was perhaps 50, with a broad face and eyes that saw things precisely and did not look away. Harlan met her in a private room at the inn where he had arranged for her to stay, and he told her, before anything else, what Eleanor Ashford had said. Agnes listened without moving. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "She tried to warn me." "Yes." "I thought—" Agnes stopped. "I thought she hadn't wanted me there, that she had told him herself. I thought— It seemed to fit, you understand, with what he said about her, that she was particular, difficult, that she made trouble for the staff. I thought she had complained about me." Her voice had gone rough. "I thought that for 5 years." "She didn't." Agnes nodded slowly, processing this, filing it away. Then she straightened in her chair. "What do you need to know?" "Everything you saw, everything you heard, everything that made you understand that something was wrong in that house." Agnes Tully told him everything. She had come to Ashford House in the 5th year of the marriage, recommended by the wife of a neighbouring estate, who had described Lord Ashford as exacting but fair, and Lady Ashford as quiet and pleasant. She had taken the position because the wages were good, and because the previous house she had worked in had closed when the family moved abroad. The first thing she noticed was the quiet. It was not the comfortable quiet of a well-ordered household. It was the taut, watchful quiet of a place where everyone was listening for something. "You learn it quickly," Agnes said. "You learn to watch his face when he comes in from outside. You learn the sound of his footsteps on the stairs. Is it the quick step or the slow one? Because those mean different things. You learn what expressions are safe and what expressions draw attention. The other staff don't tell you directly. They just show you. You watch them and you learn." Harlan wrote without speaking. She, Lady Ashford, was very careful. Very quiet. She never raised her voice. She never said anything that could be repeated against her. But you could see it. She flinched sometimes when he entered a room unexpectedly. Not much. Just a small thing, a tensing, a gathering of herself. And then she would smooth it over and be perfectly composed, and you'd wonder if you'd imagined it, except you'd seen it before, and you'd see it again, and after a while, you stop wondering. "Did you see any injuries?" "Once. I was helping her dress for an evening engagement, and she had bruising on her shoulder and the upper part of her back. She saw me see it, and she said she had fallen from her horse. She was a very good rider. I had seen her ride many times. I didn't say anything." Agnes's jaw tightened. I should have said something. "What would you have said? And to whom?" Agnes looked at him steadily. "That's the answer, isn't it? I didn't know what to say or who to say it to. Lord Ashford was a magistrate's friend. He was respected. He sat on the county board. The other staff had already shown me what happened to people who drew attention to things best left unnoticed. And she was so composed. She never asked for anything. She never cried where anyone could see. If she had broken down and wept in front of me, I might have done something, I think. But she was so controlled. Because she had learned that showing distress made it worse. Agnes absorbed this. Yes, I understand that now. I didn't understand it then. She folded her hands in her lap. The morning he dismissed me, he called me into his study. He said I had overstepped my position, that my familiarity with Lady Ashford was inappropriate, that her welfare was his concern and not that of the household staff. He said I was dismissed without character, and that if I made any claims about the household or its management, he had the means to pursue legal action against me. He threatened you. Very politely. Agnes's expression was dry and bleak. He was always very polite. That was the thing about him. He was always perfectly controlled, always had the right word for the situation, and he never threatened you in a way that you could quite hold. You couldn't put your finger on it. You just understood that certain things would have consequences, and the consequences were never spoken aloud. Harlan set down his pen. Would you be willing to testify to this? Agnes was quiet for a moment. I have been dismissed without character for 5 years. I have not been able to find household work since. I do laundry. I am good at it, and I do not regret it. But it is not what I was trained for, and it is not what I would have chosen. She met his eyes. Yes, I will testify. I have been waiting to say these things in a room where someone writes them down for 5 years. Samuel Holt came the following morning, a large, quiet man in his late 40s who walked with the particular straight-backed correctness of someone who had spent 20 years in service and could not quite let go of the posture even when the position was gone. He had found work as a coachman, as his note had said, and he came to Exeter on his half-day and sat across from Harlan and said, before Harlan could begin, I want to know first if she's going to be all right. That depends in part on what you tell me, Harlan said. Samuel nodded. Then I'll tell you everything. He had been head footman at Ashford House for 2 years, hired in the 3rd year of the marriage. He was, as he put it, not a man who overlooked things, and what he had seen in Ashford House had troubled him from the beginning. Not because any individual incident was obviously criminal. Lord Ashford was too careful for that. But because the accumulation of small things, each explainable individually, formed a pattern that could not be explained away. He controlled her money, Samuel said flatly. She had no funds of her own. Any purchase she needed to make, she had to request in writing through his secretary. I know because I sometimes delivered the requests and saw them returned with annotations, denied, approved with modification. The modifications were always about reducing the amount or changing what was to be purchased. Even things like gloves. A new pair of gloves would come back with a notation that the existing pair was adequate. Did you witness any physical altercations? Samuel looked at his hands. Once. I was outside the study door. I had come to tell Lord Ashford that his carriage was ready. I heard her voice, and then a sound I recognised, and then silence. When Lord Ashford opened the door, she was standing in the centre of the room, looking at the wall. Her hand was at her cheek. He looked at me and said, Lady Ashford has a headache and won't be joining me this evening. Send word to the Palmers. And he left. You saw the aftermath. She didn't move until his footsteps had gone. Then she turned, and she saw me and her face. Samuel stopped, composed himself. She wasn't embarrassed. She was watching me to see what I would do, whether I would use it, whether I would make it worse, whether I could be trusted not to make her situation harder than it already was. And I looked back at her and I said, "Should I send for the physician, my lady?" And she said no. She said she had a headache and wanted to rest, and that was all. You didn't press further. No, because she had told me clearly, in the way she was able to tell anyone anything in that house, that pressing further would not help her, that it might in fact make things worse. Samuel's voice had gone rough. I have thought about that moment for 4 years, whether I should have done more, what more would have looked like, how you help someone who has been taught that accepting help is dangerous. Harlan said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would change it. He dismissed me when he found out I had helped her post a letter. Samuel looked up. She had written to her sister in Scotland. Her sister had married and moved north, and Lord Ashford had not approved of the marriage, claimed the man was unsuitable, and he had forbidden correspondence. Lady Ashford gave me the letter and asked me to post it when I was next in town. She didn't ask me to keep it secret. She didn't have to. I knew what it meant if he found out. He found out. He found out. I was dismissed within the week. I was told I had been dishonest and had betrayed the household's trust. He gave me no character. Did Lady Ashford know what had happened? That you were dismissed because of the letter? I don't know. I wasn't allowed to speak to her before I left. He had a man from the estate walk me to the gate. Samuel was quiet for a moment. The letter never arrived. He must have intercepted it before I got to town, which means he knew about it before he dismissed me, which means he spent a week watching me normally, letting me go about my work, letting me think I had gotten away with it, and then dismissed me when I had no warning at all. He met Harlan's eyes. That was his method, letting you think you were safe and then acting when you least expected it. It was the same with her, I think. Long periods of normalcy, long enough to make you hope, and then, without warning. I think the unpredictability was part of it. Harlan wrote this down with a hand that was not entirely steady. By the end of the week, he had spoken to 4 more former servants. Each account was different in its details and identical in its architecture. The controlled household. The pattern of dismissals for small acts of loyalty to Eleanor. The careful policing of her correspondence, her movements, her money, her social connections. The escalating confinement as the years passed. The particular, deliberate isolation of a woman from every person and resource that might have supported her. And over, the same response from each witness. I saw something. I was not certain what to do with what I saw. I was afraid of what would happen if I spoke. I left, or was forced out, and I told myself it was none of my business, and I have not believed that for a single day since. On the 5th day, Harlan visited Eleanor Ashford in the evening, and sat across from her and put his notes on the table between them. Not for her to read, as an act of honesty, to show her that what had been done to her had been written down, catalogued, witnessed. She looked at the stack of pages for a long time without touching them. "Your sister," he said, "in Scotland. I have written to her." Eleanor's breath caught. It was the most unguarded reaction he had seen from her. "She doesn't know where I am," Eleanor said. "She does now. I have explained the situation." He paused. "She has already written back. She is prepared to travel south immediately if you wish it. The choice is entirely yours." Eleanor put one hand flat on the table, not on the notes, beside them, as though she needed to feel something solid. "What did she say?" Harlan reached into his coat and withdrew the letter he had received that morning. A brief, urgent note in handwriting that was large and emphatic in a way that suggested a person who was not accustomed to containing herself. He read it aloud. I have been sick with worry for 2 years. His people returned every letter I sent. I did not know what had become of her. I tried not to think. If she is alive, I will come. I will come as fast as horses can carry me. Tell her that I never stopped. Eleanor's eyes closed. When she opened them, there was something in them that had not been there before. Not relief, which required believing the danger was over, but the specific overwhelm of realizing that someone had been searching for you in the dark for years. She should not have to travel in winter, Eleanor said. She has already said she intends to, regardless. A silence. I thought he had convinced her I didn't want to hear from her. He told me she had stopped writing because she disapproved of me, of my inability to manage my household properly, She stopped, rearranged the sentence. He told me many things, about what other people thought of me, about how I was perceived, about how fortunate I was to have his guidance because without it I would be too much, too difficult, too much trouble. She looked at the window. He was very specific about my failures, very detailed. After 8 years, I had quite a comprehensive understanding of everything wrong with me. He told you lies, Harlan said. Carefully constructed lies that served to make you dependent on him as the only person whose opinion of you was reliable. Eleanor looked at him. How do you know that? Because I have spoken to 10 people this week, none of whom described the woman he described. She was quiet for a long time. What do they describe? She finally asked, and her voice was very careful, the voice of someone who wants something and is afraid to want it. A woman who tried to protect a servant from consequences that would fall on her behalf. A woman who found ways to communicate with her sister in defiance of explicit prohibition. A woman who was seen and remembered by every person who worked for her with the particular quality of attention and loyalty that you do not offer to someone you do not care about. A woman who endured things that would have destroyed most people and came out of it still capable of caring about other people's welfare. He held her gaze. None of them described a woman with too many failures. Eleanor looked away. Her jaw was tight and her eyes were bright, and she held herself very still for several long moments with the effort of someone refusing to come apart in front of an audience. I need to tell you what happened the night he died, she said finally. Only if you are ready. I have been ready for 8 years. I have not had a room to say it in. She looked back at him, and whatever had been locked away behind her composure was still locked. She was not going to let it go in front of anyone, not yet. But the decision was visible in her face, the deliberate choosing of it. I will tell you everything, all of it, not just the night, all of it. And you will write it down, and what you do with it afterward is your business. But I want it in writing. I want there to exist somewhere in this world a true account of what my marriage was. There will be, Harlan said. He picked up his pen. Take whatever time you need. Eleanor Ashford took one long, steady breath, and then she began. She had been 22 when she married Edmund Ashford. He was 35, charming, well-connected, with the kind of easy authority that her family had mistaken for reliability. Her father had been pleased. Her mother had called her fortunate. Her sister Catherine, who was 2 years younger and had always been the more direct of the two, had said privately that there was something in his eyes she didn't quite like. He looks at you like you're something he's acquired. And Eleanor had dismissed this because Catherine was prone to strong opinions, and Edmund was, by every measurable standard, an excellent match. The first 3 months of the marriage were not unhappy. They were something more complicated, a constant performance of happiness, while Eleanor adjusted to a set of expectations she had not known existed until she failed to meet them. He did not raise his voice. He did not, in those early months, do anything she could have pointed to as clearly wrong. He simply made it clear, through the precise withdrawal of warmth, through the clinical observation that she had said something inappropriate at dinner, through the long silences that followed perceived transgressions, that there was a correct way to be his wife, and she had not yet mastered it. She tried to master it. This seemed, at the time, like the rational response. She did not know yet that the standard was not fixed, that it would shift, imperceptibly, so that each achievement was quietly revised upward until she could never quite reach it. She was learning to be a wife, she told herself. She was learning the requirements of his household. She was inexperienced, and he was patient, and she should be grateful for his guidance. In the 4th month, she accepted an invitation to tea with a friend without telling him first. He was away when the invitation arrived, and she thought it was a small thing, a minor independence, the kind of thing that required no announcement. He came home while she was out. She returned to find him in the drawing room, and his face entirely still in the particular way she was learning to fear. And he said, "I wasn't aware you had plans this afternoon." She explained. She apologized. She said she had thought it was small enough not to require discussion. "Your social calendar is not a small matter," he said. "It reflects on me. Every interaction you have in public reflects on my household. I need to know where you are at all times." She said she understood. She believed she understood. She would tell him in future. He smiled. "Good. Let's not have this conversation again." She did not understand until much later that the smile was not forgiveness. It was the end of a test she did not know she had been taking. Harlan wrote without speaking. Eleanor's voice was steady and precise, and entirely without self-pity, which he found harder to bear than tears would have been. She spoke like a woman reading a record, as though she had narrated these events to herself so many times over the years that she had learned to distance herself from them by treating them as data rather than memory. In the 4th month, in the 1st year, in the 3rd year, dates and sequences, and what happened next. It got worse in the 2nd year. She had known by then the essential architecture of what she was living in, the careful monitoring of her correspondence, the management of her social connections, the systematic reduction of her world to the house and its immediate grounds and the people he approved. She had written to her mother once, carefully, trying to convey something of the reality without saying anything that could be taken from her and used against her. Her mother had written back, "All marriages require adjustment, Eleanor. Edmund is a good man. I hope you are not letting your imagination run away with you." The letter from her mother had been opened before she received it. She could tell by the way it was folded. She had learned to tell. In the 2nd year, he broke her wrist. It was not, she was careful to say, the first time he had hurt her. There had been other incidents, a grip that left bruises, a shove against the wall that she had told herself was a loss of temper in an argument, the backhand across her cheek that she had told herself was exceptional, unrepeatable, not representative. She had told herself many things. She had developed an extensive vocabulary for making the unacceptable fit into a framework of normality, because the alternative, naming it fully, accepting its full dimensions, would have required a response she had no resources to make. He broke her wrist because she had been seen talking to a young man at a public assembly. A friend's brother, someone she had known for years, a brief exchange about a book she had recommended. She had not told Edmund she knew him. She had not, in the moment, thought to. It had not seemed like the kind of thing that required telling. She understood her error almost immediately, from the quality of his silence in the carriage going home. By the time they reached the house, she was already explaining, already apologizing for what she had not yet been accused of. The explanation was not accepted. She did not tell anyone the wrist was broken. She told Dr. Stowe, when Edmund summoned him, that she had fallen. Dr. Stowe looked at the wrist and at her face and at Edmund, standing in the corner of the room, and prescribed a splint and told her to rest. Harlan set his pen down when she reached this point. He did it quietly, and he looked at his hands for a moment, and then he picked the pen back up and wrote what she had said. "Why did you protect him?" he asked, not accusingly, genuinely. "Dr. Stowe, the circumstances." "Why?" "Because I knew what would happen if I didn't." Her voice was patient, the patience of someone explaining something they have explained to themselves thousands of times. He had told me by that point what would happen if I made accusations he considered false. He would have me certified, nervous collapse, hysteria. There were physicians who would sign the papers for the right fee, and there were institutions, comfortable ones, private ones, not the terrible places, where women who caused difficulty were managed. He was very clear about this, very specific. He named the place. He described how it was done. And he was right that he could do it. He had the connections, he had the resources, and I had nothing. No money of my own. A family who had told me I was imagining things. No friends he had not already moved me away from. If I told the truth, and he did this, I would have no recourse at all. So you said nothing. I had a child to consider by then. Harlan stilled. Eleanor looked at the window. A daughter. She was born in the 2nd year of the marriage, and she died of fever in the 3rd. She was 11 months old. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. After that, there was no child to consider. But by then, I had learned the shape of my situation clearly enough to know that the only possible approach was survival. Stay contained. Endure. Do not give him cause for escalation. Wait. Wait for what? For something to change. I didn't know what. I had stopped believing anything would change by the 5th year. By the 6th, I had stopped being able to imagine a world in which I was not his wife. That is a particular thing that happens, I think, when you live inside the same walls for long enough. The world outside the walls becomes theoretical. It loses its reality. Harlan understood that this was the most important thing she had said so far, and he wrote it down with that understanding. "What changed?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "My sister found a way to get a letter to me in the 7th year. She had been trying. I didn't know. I thought she had accepted his account of me. I thought she had decided I wasn't worth the effort. But she had been trying for years and finally found a method he hadn't anticipated. She gave a letter to the wife of one of his colleagues, a woman he trusted, with instructions to deliver it personally and privately and tell no one." Eleanor's voice had changed slightly, lost a degree of the clinical distance. The letter was 3 pages. She told me she had never stopped writing, that she had suspected for years something was wrong and had been trying to reach me. She told me she was well and that she had a daughter of her own now. And she told me. Eleanor stopped. She told me she was going to keep writing until I wrote back, and that if I couldn't write back, she was going to come herself, regardless of what Edmund said or what it cost. She said I was her sister, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. Harlan said nothing. "It sounds like a small thing," Eleanor said. "It doesn't sound like a small thing. It reminded me that there was someone outside the walls who knew I existed." She looked at her hands. "That sounds... I'm not sure how to explain it. When you have been in the same place for a very long time, and the same person has been defining you for that long, you begin to lose the sense that there is any other version of yourself, any other perspective from which you are anything other than what he says you are. My sister's letter was the first outside perspective I had received in years, the first reminder that there was a world in which I existed as something other than his wife." "What did you do?" "I wrote back, secretly. It took me 3 months to find a reliable method. I gave the letter to a kitchen maid who was leaving the household to visit family in the West Country. I don't know if it arrived." "Your sister received it," Harlan said. He remembered the letter, the large, emphatic handwriting, the urgency of it. "It arrived." Eleanor was very still. "She received it in the spring," Harlan said. "She wrote back immediately. He must have intercepted that one." "He intercepted them all after that. I never knew if the first had gotten through. I tried twice more, and both times I could tell, by the way he looked at me afterward, that he had found them." She paused. That was when he began to discuss more permanent measures. "What do you mean?" He became more explicit about what my options were. He said once, very calmly, that a woman could die in a house like this, and it would take weeks for anyone to find her. And that fever was a very common cause of death, and that no one would question it. And that he was simply making an observation about the nature of the world. Her voice was entirely flat. He was always making observations of that kind in the last year. Never threats exactly, observations about the nature of the world and what it contained. Harlan's pen had gone still again. He made himself pick it up. "I began to accept that I would not leave the house alive," Eleanor said. "Not because I gave up. I want to be precise about this. But because it seemed like the most accurate reading of the situation. I was looking for any method of documentation, any way to leave evidence of what had been done to me, so that if I died, there would be something, some account." She glanced at the stack of notes on the table. "That is what I want now. Not for my own sake. I have stopped expecting things on my own behalf. I want there to be a record." "Tell me about the night he died," Harlan said. Eleanor looked at the window for a moment. When she looked back, her expression was as controlled as it had been when she walked into the inquest chamber, but he could see now what that control cost. "He had intercepted another letter," she said. "I don't know which one. I had been trying to find ways to document what was happening, to leave evidence with anyone I could reach. I had written to a cousin. I had written to a woman I had known before the marriage. One of those had been intercepted, or he had found something else. He was in a particular state when he came home, controlled, but with something beneath it that was different from his usual controlled anger. This was anticipatory. He said he was tired of managing my behavior. He said there was a simpler solution." She stopped. Harlan waited. "He told me he had arranged for a physician to come the following week. A specific physician, not Dr. Stowe, who would certify my mental incapacity. He said the paperwork was already prepared, that I would be moved to a private facility in Wiltshire. He said it quite casually, the way you might announce a change in household arrangements. Then he said he was going to have a drink, and he expected me to join him in the study to discuss the practical details of the transition." "And you went?" "I went." A pause. I had a paper knife in my pocket. Harlan held very still. I had taken it from his desk 2 weeks before, when I had been called in to sign a document he required my signature on. He didn't see me take it. I didn't know what I intended to do with it. I told myself it was only for security, that if he ever became physically violent in a way I could not manage, I would have something. I had never used it. I had mostly convinced myself it was foolish. What happened in the study? He poured the drinks, and he began talking about the arrangements. Very practical, very specific. He described the facility. I think he had visited it, or at least researched it in some detail. He described the room I would have. He described the process for managing my affairs during what he called my convalescence. Her voice had gone perfectly flat, the flatness of controlled memory. He said he hoped I understood this was for my own benefit, that I was clearly not well, and that the kindest thing he could do was ensure I received proper care. He was drinking as he spoke. He was not drunk. He was very rarely truly drunk. But he was in a particular state that I had learned to watch, not less controlled, more certain of his control. The specific confidence of someone who has decided that a problem is about to be resolved. She took a breath. I asked him what would happen to my sister, whether I would be permitted contact with her. He said that contact with outside influences had been a significant part of my difficulties and that it would not be appropriate during my treatment. He said, and I am giving you his exact words because I have replayed them many times, he said, "You have no one left to contact, Eleanor. There is only me, and there will only be me, and eventually you will understand that this is the correct arrangement." The room was very quiet. Outside, Harlan could hear the distant sound of the building at work, footsteps and voices and ordinary life going about its ordinary business. He moved toward me, Eleanor said. I don't know if he intended to touch me or simply to make his point with proximity. He often did that, came very close without touching, so that I could not claim harm but could not pretend to feel safe. He came close, and I stepped back, and I was against the bookcase, and he reached out to take my arm, and She stopped. I used the paper knife, she said. Her voice had not changed at all. This, Harlan thought, was perhaps the most devastating thing about it. I used it, and there was a moment where we both stood very still and looked at each other, and I think we were both equally surprised, and then he fell. And I was standing there, and the room was locked, and he was on the floor, and I realized that I was not afraid. That was the thing I remember most clearly. 8 years, and for the first time in the locked room with him on the floor, I was not afraid of him. I sat down on the floor beside him, and I waited, and I was not afraid. She looked at Harlan directly. I did not call for help, she said. I want to be honest about that. I did not call for help immediately. I sat on the floor for some period of time. I don't know how long, and I was not afraid. And I was very tired, and eventually I lost consciousness. I don't know when. I came to in this building. Harlan looked at the pages he had filled. Then he looked at Eleanor Ashford, who had told him the most difficult truth he had ever asked someone to tell, and had told it without asking for anything in return. You did not call for help, he said carefully. No. You were found unconscious, which suggests that whatever happened in that room was not without physical consequence to you. Eleanor blinked. She looked down at herself, as though she had forgotten that her body had been present in the room. I had a head injury, I think, from the bookcase when he had me against it. I didn't notice at the time. The room was locked from the inside. You could have unlocked it at any point. You could have left. She looked at him. Where would I have gone? The question sat in the room. That is not an excuse, Eleanor said. I am not offering it as a reason to dismiss what I did. I killed my husband. I sat on the floor beside him and did not call for help, and I do not intend to claim that this was not a choice. It was a choice. I am choosing not to lie to you about it. You have been choosing not to lie about anything, Harlan said, since the moment you walked into that chamber. She looked at him. You confessed to being present. You confessed to not denying responsibility. You just told me, in detail, everything that happened, including the parts that do not present you in the best possible light. He held her gaze. You could have told me you were frightened, that it was reflex, that you don't remember clearly. You could have constructed a version of events that served your interests more effectively. You chose not to. I am tired of managing what people know, she said. I have spent 8 years managing every piece of information in that house, every expression on my face, every word I said. I am tired. I would rather tell the truth and take whatever comes of it than manage one more thing. Harlan was quiet for a long moment. What I am going to do, he said, is reconvene the inquest hearing. I am going to present the medical evidence, the testimony of your former household staff, your sister's account of her attempts to reach you, and your account of your marriage and the night of Lord Ashford's death. I am going to ask the court to consider whether what happened in that room constitutes murder or self-preservation in the face of a documented and escalating threat to your life. He paused. I want to be honest with you. I cannot guarantee the outcome. Edmund Ashford was a respected man with powerful friends. Some of those men will fight to protect his reputation because his reputation reflects on them. I know. And I need to ask you something I have not asked you yet. He met her eyes. Would you be willing to testify? In person? Before the court? Eleanor was quiet for a long time. You said I could refuse, she said. You can refuse. The physical and testimonial evidence may be sufficient without it. I will not pretend it would not be stronger with your voice, but I will not compel you. She looked at the window, at the bare elm tree, which had stood in the courtyard through things it could not know about, and would stand there still when they were all gone. I will testify, she said. Harlan nodded. I want to ask you something as well, Eleanor said. Of course. Why? Her voice was direct, the voice she had been keeping carefully contained for days. You came to this building to finalize my execution? You had signed the papers. You could have looked away from what you saw. Every other man in that room was going to look away. Why didn't you? Harlan considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I have spent 7 years dispensing the law, he said, and I believe in the law. I believe in the system and the process and the necessity of it. But I walked into that chamber with a signed execution order, and I saw a woman who was waiting to die with more equanimity than any innocent person should possess, and I understood in that moment that the system had not been applied to the situation I was actually looking at. It had been applied to a simplified version of it. A version that was convenient for everyone in that room. He paused. The law is meant to account for all of the truth, not a selected portion of it. When I saw your arms, I understood that the truth had been actively selected against. That there was a truth that was supposed to be invisible, and I had accidentally seen it. A pause. I don't know how to look away from something I've seen. Eleanor studied him for a long time. That is a better answer than I expected, she finally said. I'm going to try to be worth it, he said. He spent the next 3 days preparing the case with the precision of a man who understood exactly what he was dismantling and how hard those who had built it would fight. He visited Dr. Frederick Stowe in his offices on the second day. Stowe was a man in his mid-50s, prosperous and practiced, with the comfortable confidence of someone whose professional reputation had never been seriously challenged. He received Harlan with the cordial wariness of a man who suspects he is about to be accused of something and has already prepared his defenses. "Dr. Stowe," Harlan said without preamble, "your examination of Lady Ashford produced a 4-sentence report. I examined what was relevant to the immediate investigation. You examined what you chose to examine and reported what you chose to report." Harlan set Constance Aldridge's findings on the desk between them. "Dr. Aldridge has produced 17 pages documenting injuries that you saw and did not report. Some of those injuries are years old. Some show evidence of fractures that were not properly treated. All of them are consistent with long-term systematic violence." Stowe's jaw tightened. "I found no evidence of—" "Do not lie to me, Dr. Stowe. I have your report, and I have Dr. Aldridge's findings, and they describe the same woman who was clearly injured in ways that have nothing to do with one night in a locked room. The question I am interested in is not whether you saw these injuries. The question is who told you not to report them." A silence. Stowe looked at the report. He looked at Harlan. He looked at the window, which offered no useful escape. "Lord Ashford was a patient and a friend," he said finally. "That is not an answer to my question. When I examined Lady Ashford in previous years, he was present, as a matter of concern for her welfare." The euphemism was transparent, and Stowe knew it. He indicated, on one occasion, that my reports should focus on matters directly relevant to the specific complaint and not extrapolate. "He told you to look away." "He told me to be professional and specific." "And you complied because he was a magistrate's friend and a respected member of the county board, and it was easier to be specific than to be honest." Harlan kept his voice level. "You will provide a revised report. You will include every injury you observed in every examination you conducted of Lady Ashford. You will include dates, descriptions, and your professional assessment of their likely causes. You will have this report to me by tomorrow morning." Stowe's face had gone through several colours. "And if I refuse?" "Then the Royal College of Physicians will be reviewing the question of whether a physician who documents injuries in service of a patient's abuser rather than the patient's welfare has fulfilled his professional obligations." Harlan stood. "I will expect the report tomorrow." He saw Edmund Ashford's solicitor that afternoon. The man was named Cartwell, careful and precise, and he had managed Ashford's legal affairs for 12 years. Harlan did not accuse him of anything. He simply reviewed, methodically, the financial arrangements of the marriage, the disposition of Eleanor's dowry, the legal instruments that had given Edmund control of the household accounts, the specific provisions that had ensured Eleanor had no independent access to funds. "All of this is standard practice," Cartwell said carefully. "I am aware that it is standard practice," Harlan said. "I am documenting it because I want the court to understand what standard practice looks like in terms of a woman's ability to leave a dangerous marriage." Cartwell looked at him. "She killed him. She was trapped in a house with a man who had announced his intention to have her institutionalized, having been unable for years to access any legal, financial, or social means of escape. I want the court to understand the dimensions of the trap she was in." Harlan met the solicitor's eyes. "I want every man in that courtroom to understand precisely what the law they have operated under made possible." On the 4th day, he received a visitor he had not summoned. the man who came to his office unannounced was a baronet named Sir George Martin, and he was one of Edmund Ashford's oldest friends. A heavy-set man in his 60s, with the easy authority of someone who had never needed to justify himself and had no intention of starting now. "Lord Commissioner," Martin said, settling into the chair across from Harlan's desk, without being invited to. "I understand you have been conducting an unusual investigation." "I have been conducting a complete investigation," Harlan said. Edmund Ashford was a man of impeccable standing. He served his county well. He was admired and respected by people who knew him over many years. Martin's voice was measured, affable, and entirely without goodwill. "I understand that a woman facing a capital sentence might seek to raise questions about her victim's character. That is not unusual. What is unusual is an officer of the court who appears to be pursuing those questions with considerable energy. The energy seems appropriate to the evidence." "What evidence?" Martin's affability thinned slightly. "A physician's report, contested by the dead man's personal doctor. The testimony of dismissed servants who have every reason to damage their former employer's reputation. The account of a woman who killed her husband and needs a reason why. The account of a woman who killed her husband and declined, at every opportunity, to construct a reason why until I asked for one." Harlan held Martin's gaze without difficulty. "Sir George, I appreciate that you are here because you cared about your friend. I will tell you what I tell everyone who comes to me with a concern about this investigation. I am pursuing the complete truth of what happened in that house. If that truth vindicates Lord Ashford, it will be documented. If it does not, that will be documented as well. You risk your reputation on the word of a woman who confessed to murder. I risk my reputation on evidence that I have examined with considerable care. And I would note, Sir George, that you are not the first person to come to me this week, suggesting that pursuing the complete truth is inadvisable. The number of people with an interest in keeping the truth incomplete is itself instructive." Martin stared at him for a long moment. "Edmund had a great many friends," he said. "I am aware." Harlan met his gaze steadily. "I have a mandate from this county to administer justice without fear or favour. I intend to do so. If Lord Ashford's friends wish to speak on his behalf, they are welcome to do so in the inquest chamber next week." Martin left without further comment, but the visit clarified what Harlan had already suspected. The friends were organising. They would appear at the hearing. They would speak to Edmund Ashford's character, his contributions, his standing. They would attempt to reduce Eleanor's testimony to the desperate fabrication of a woman with nothing to lose. He spent the 5th day writing his opening address for the reconvened hearing. He rewrote it 3 times, stripping it back each time to the essential skeleton. He had found, over 7 years, that the most persuasive legal arguments were also the simplest. Not because juries and courts lacked sophistication, but because complexity offered places to hide from the moral weight of a thing. He wanted no hiding places. He visited Eleanor on the 5th evening. She was writing when he arrived. A letter, he thought, to her sister. She put it aside when he knocked, and he saw, as she folded it, that it was several pages. "My sister is coming," she said. "She arrives at the end of the week." "Good." He sat in the chair across from her. "How are you?" She looked at him with the slight narrowing of someone who is still calibrating whether directness is safe. "I am. Not sleeping well." "Understandable." "I dream about the room. Not the night it happened. Before it. All the ordinary nights in that room, in that house. The particular quality of silence when he was in the house and not visibly angry. The way I measured everything. Harlan listened. I keep waking up in the dark and thinking I am still there, she said. That all of this. She gestured vaguely at the room around her, the temporary quarters with their unglamorous practicality and their unlocked door. Is something I invented. And then I remember I am not there, and I cannot decide if that is better or worse. It will get worse before it gets better, Harlan said. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. Coming out of something like that is not immediate. It's not the ending of a bad chapter and the beginning of a good one. It's... He paused, choosing his words. It is the slow, disorienting process of learning to exist in a world that is different from the one you have been surviving in for 8 years. Eleanor looked at him. Do you speak from experience? Not personal experience of what you endured. Some experience of coming out of circumstances that required everything and discovering that recovery was less triumphant than I had expected. He paused. The campaigns. When I came back from the war, I expected to feel relief, safety. I felt mostly confused, like the skills I had developed for surviving that situation had no application to the ordinary world, and I had to learn a different way of being in it. How long did it take? Years, but it got incrementally better, which is the only kind of better there is. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. You are not what I expected, she said, which was almost exactly what Constance Aldridge had said, but with a different quality to it. What did you expect? Another man with a conclusion already decided. I came in with a conclusion already decided, Harlan said. I had signed the execution order. You changed your mind. I looked at evidence I had been about to ignore. There's a difference. He held her gaze. I am not a particularly unusual man, Lady Ashford. I did what anyone ought to have done. The fact that I feel notable for it is an indictment of every other person in that chamber. She looked at him for a long time, with an assessment he was beginning to be able to read, not searching for threats or exits, but genuinely considering. The look of a person deciding how much to trust, not because trust was naive, but because it was, carefully and deliberately, chosen. Tell me about the hearing, she said. What should I expect? He told her. All of it, including the parts that would be difficult, the cross-examination, the likelihood that Edmund's friends would appear, the way her marriage and her behaviour in it would be examined and interpreted in public. He did not soften it. She had asked for the complete truth, and he gave it. She listened without flinching. When he finished, she said, I would like to speak to Agnes Tully before the hearing. I can arrange that. And I would like to review my own testimony with you beforehand. I want to be certain I am saying what I mean to say, that nothing I say can be misinterpreted. We can do that. And I would like... She stopped, seemed to reconsider. Then, as if deciding something about herself, I would like my sister to be present in the room, if that is possible. I don't need her near me. I want there to be someone in the room who has known me since before. Harlan nodded. She will be there. Eleanor looked at her hands, at the inside of her wrists, which she had stopped reflexively hiding around him some days ago. I have been thinking about what you said, that I kept being precise about the things that did not present me well, about not calling for help, about sitting on the floor. Yes. I did not do that as a strategy. I did not think, this will make me appear more credible. I told you because I have spent 8 years inside a set of carefully managed narratives, and I find I cannot do it anymore. I find that managing a narrative, even one that would help me, is intolerable. I would rather be the complicated true thing than the simple, useful thing. That is the bravest thing you have said to me, Harlan said. She looked up, surprised. And you have said a great many brave things, he added. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, not yet, but its precursor. The particular expression of a person who has been told something true and is not quite sure what to do with it. The reconvened inquest hearing was held in the county court chamber, a larger room than the original venue, because word had spread and the gallery was full. The people who came were not all the same people who had come to the original sentencing. There were more women, Harlan noted, more servants in the back rows. And in the front of the gallery, sitting with the precise, upright posture of a woman who has travelled a great distance in winter weather and arrived with everything she intended to say, was a young woman with dark hair and an expression of fierce, focused attention who must be Catherine. Eleanor saw her the moment she was brought in. Harlan watched her see her, the slight catch in her breathing, the way her eyes went to her sister and stayed there for a moment too long for composure, and then the deliberate pulling back of herself, the steadying. Catherine, from the gallery, looked at Eleanor with an expression that contained years of worry and relief and rage in equal measure. And she nodded, a small, certain nod. I am here. I know. I see you. Eleanor sat down. Her spine was straight. Her hands were folded. Harlan called the hearing to order. He began with the evidence. Constance Aldridge presented her medical findings first, with the calm precision of someone who has no intention of allowing her conclusions to be argued with. She read from her report. She described the injuries. She specified dates and ages of damage. She stated, without qualification, that the injuries she had documented could not have resulted from a single violent encounter and were consistent with years of systematic physical harm. When she was finished, Edmund's solicitor Cartwell, who had been retained by the Ashford estate, attempted a cross-examination that sought to introduce doubt about her qualifications. Constance dealt with this without apparent effort. She named her training. She named her years of practice. She noted that Dr. Frederick Stowe, who had also examined Lady Ashford, had revised his original report to include the same injuries she had documented, which she believed spoke to the objective nature of the findings. The mention of the revised report produced a ripple through the chamber. Harlan watched Cartwell reassess his approach. The former household servants testified next. Agnes Tully came to the witness chair with the quiet dignity of someone who has waited 5 years to say something and is not going to be hurried. She told what she had seen and heard in clear, precise terms, and she looked at Eleanor when she described the morning of her dismissal. And Eleanor looked back at her, and something passed between them that was too complicated for the room to quite hold. Samuel Holt followed. Then 2 other former staff members, each adding their account to the accumulating record. Harlan watched the gallery as they spoke. He watched faces change. Not uniformly. There were men in the room who were growing more rigid, more set, as each testimony compounded the last. Edmund's friends, the men Martin had organised. But there were also people who had come to watch a murderer condemned and were finding that what they were watching was something quite different, and who were not certain what to do with the distance between what they had expected and what they were hearing. Catherine Renfrew testified about her attempts to reach her sister. She was concise and precise, and her voice was controlled, but her hands, folded in her lap, were white-knuckled. She described the years of returned letters, the one letter that had gotten through, the subsequent silence, the specific, grinding fear of knowing something is wrong and having no way to reach through the walls to the person inside. Cartwell tried to cross-examine her as well. Catherine handled it differently from Constance, with a kind of flat, contained anger that was, if anything, more effective. When Cartwell suggested that her sister might simply have not wished to correspond, Catherine said, "My sister wrote to me twice, using methods that required considerable creativity and risk. One of those letters arrived. She was writing to me. She was being prevented from writing to me. These are not the same thing." Then Harlan called Eleanor Ashford. The chamber was very quiet as she walked to the witness chair. Harlan heard it, the specific quality of attention that filled the room when she sat down and looked at him with an expression of absolute composure that contained, he now knew, every difficult thing she had survived. "Lady Ashford," he said, "I am going to ask you to tell this court about your marriage. I want you to take whatever time you need. I want you to say what is true, as completely and precisely as you can. This court is listening." He watched her find her sister in the gallery. Another nod exchanged, smaller this time, barely visible. A woman grounding herself. And then Eleanor Ashford began to speak. She told them. All of it, as she had told Harlan. But differently now, without the testing quality of someone deciding what was safe to release. She spoke as someone who has made a decision and is seeing it through. She told them about the rules and what happened when she broke them. She told them about the wrist. She told them about the daughter. She told them about the systematic dismantling of every connection and resource that might have supported her. And she told it in the precise, dateable terms of a woman who had catalogued her own history in order to survive it. She told them about her sister's letter, about what it had meant to receive a single perspective from outside the walls. She told them about the paper knife and why she had taken it, and what she had intended and not intended. She told them about the night Edmund died, with the same unadorned precision she had used in private, not constructing a narrative that served her, but giving them the truth, including the parts that complicated it. The chamber was silent throughout. When she reached the end, she looked at Harlan and said, "I did not go into that study intending to kill my husband. I went in because I had no choice about going in. Refusing to come when he called had consequences I had learned not to invite. I used the paper knife because he came at me, and I believed he would harm me. Whether I was right about his intention, I cannot tell you. But I can tell you that I had been given, for 8 years, considerable evidence on which to base that belief. And I can tell you that when it was over, I did not call for help immediately, and I am telling you that truthfully, because I have been told that the truth, spoken in a room where it is actually heard, is worth something. I would like to find out if that is accurate." She folded her hands in her lap and looked at the room and waited. Harlan looked at the chamber, at the expressions he found there, the rigid faces of the men who had been Edmund Ashford's friends, who were protecting something that no longer had a living person at its centre, at the servants in the back rows, who had come in uncertain whether this proceeding would mean anything, and who were now sitting with an alertness that said they understood it did, at Catherine Renfrew in the gallery, whose knuckles had gone white, and who was watching her sister with 8 years of compressed feeling in her face. He stood. "This court has heard medical evidence establishing that Lady Ashford sustained years of systematic physical harm. It has heard testimony from 7 witnesses to the conditions of her marriage. It has heard her own account of those conditions and of the night in question." He looked at the chamber steadily. "The question before this court is not whether Lady Ashford was present when her husband died. She has stated freely that she was. The question is what kind of act she committed in that room." He paused. Lord Edmund Ashford was a respected man. He was admired by his peers and praised for his public service. This is documented. This is true. it is also true that he administered a private life of calculated and sustained cruelty to a woman who had no legal, financial, or social means of escape. These two truths do not cancel each other out. They exist simultaneously. They ask us to understand something that is inconvenient but essential: that a man can be respected in public and monstrous in private, and that the respect does not undo the monstrousness. He looked at the men in the front rows, at Martin, whose expression had moved beyond rigidity into something that contained the particular blankness of a man who is confronting something he cannot argue with, but is not ready to accept. "Every person in this chamber," Harlan said quietly, "has benefited from a system that treated Lady Ashford's testimony as less reliable than a dead man's reputation. We treated the physician's 4-sentence report as adequate because questioning it would have required us to ask what he had seen and chosen not to say. We treated the documented household turnover as unremarkable because questioning it would have required us to ask who was dismissing servants and why. We treated a woman's silence as evidence of guilt rather than as evidence of what the world does to women who speak." He paused. "I am not standing here to condemn every man in this room. I am standing here to say that incomplete justice is not justice at all, and that what nearly happened in this chamber at the beginning of this week would have been an act of violence, compounding 8 years of violence already done." He picked up the execution order he had signed. He placed it in the center of the desk. Then he turned it over and wrote across the back: "Charge dismissed. Self-preservation under documented, sustained, and escalating threat to life. H. Graves, Lord Commissioner, November 14th, 1847. He sealed it and set it down. Lady Eleanor Ashford is released from this proceeding without charge. She is free." The chamber did not erupt the way such chambers sometimes did. It went, instead, through a series of sounds, an intake of breath from several directions at once, the particular noise of people who came expecting one thing and received another, adjusting to the difference. And beneath it all, from the gallery, a single small sound that was Catherine Renfrew pressing her hand to her mouth. Eleanor Ashford sat in the witness chair for a moment after he finished speaking. She did not cry. She sat very still and looked at the middle distance with the expression of someone who has been told something they will need to sit with for a while before they can fully receive it. Then she looked at Harlan. He held her gaze. She stood, slowly, and walked out of the witness chair and back toward the place she had been sitting. And as she passed the gallery, she looked up at her sister, and Catherine looked back down at her, and both of them managed to hold it together for exactly as long as it took for Eleanor to reach her seat, at which point she sat down, and her sister left the gallery and came through the side door and found her and held her, and Eleanor allowed herself to be held, which was the closest she had come to breaking in public, and it was not breaking at all. The days that followed were not clean. They were not the triumphant resolution that the Chamber's final statement might have suggested. Eleanor was free in the legal sense immediately. In every other sense, freedom was a process that would take considerably longer than a verdict. She stayed in Exeter for 2 weeks because her sister would not hear of her travelling before she was ready, and because Harlan would not hear of her travelling without a plan for where she was going and what she would do when she got there. She and Catherine stayed together in rooms Harlan arranged, and Harlan visited daily because there were practical matters to resolve. The question of Edmund's estate, the question of Eleanor's dowry and its disposition, the question of where she would live and on what resources. These conversations happened at a table with tea and documents, methodically. Eleanor, it emerged, was considerably more competent at financial matters than her years of managed incompetence had suggested. She had, in the privacy of her own mind during the years of the marriage, maintained a running account of exactly what Edmund had done with her money and why, on the basis that knowing things precisely was a form of power she could not be stripped of. She made this clear in the first financial conversation by simply correcting a figure that Cartwell's assistant had provided, and Harlan watched the assistant revise his approach to her accordingly. "You've done this before," Harlan said afterward, when the assistant had gone, "knowing exactly where the money is." "I knew exactly where everything was," Eleanor said. "It was the only kind of knowing I was allowed." He had thought often about the specific intelligence required to survive what she had survived: the careful observation, the cataloguing, the maintenance of an internal record when the external world was committed to denying the record existed. It was not a comfortable line of thought. It led him to places he did not want to go, about what the world wasted by caging its most careful thinkers. Agnes Tully came to visit Eleanor on the 5th day. Harlan arranged it, and then removed himself from the room, because whatever happened in that conversation was not his to observe. He waited in the corridor for an hour, and then Agnes came out with red eyes and a composure that was hard won, and she said, "Thank you," and left. And when Harlan looked in on Eleanor, she was sitting at the window with her hands in her lap, and an expression he had not seen on her face before. "She didn't blame me," Eleanor said, "for not warning her more directly. I told her I had tried to, and she said she knew, that she had understood at the time, and that she had been wrong to think later that I had told him. She said—" She stopped. She said she was glad I had survived long enough for the truth to come out. "So am I," Harlan said. Eleanor looked at him. The assessment in her eyes was different now from what it had been. Still careful. He did not think she would stop being careful for a long time, perhaps ever, and he thought that was probably rational. But underneath the carefulness, something that had been locked was incrementally opening. "I am going to Scotland," she said. "Catherine wants me to come and stay. Long enough to," she says, "long enough to remember what it is to be somewhere safe. That sounds right. And after that, I don't know." She paused. "For years, I have not thought about after. I have thought about tomorrow, about the next hour. The calculation of what the next hour required. Long-range thinking was not useful because the future was too uncertain and too bounded by things I couldn't control." She looked at her hands. "I find I am now in possession of a future, and I am not entirely certain what to do with it. You don't have to know yet." "I know." A pause. "I find that I want to do something. I don't know what. Something that—" "I have been thinking about Agnes and Samuel and the other people who saw something and didn't know where to go with it. The gap. The gap between knowing something is wrong and having a means of doing anything about it." Harlan was quiet, listening. "I don't know what that looks like," Eleanor said, "but I find I am more interested in thinking about the gap than I am in thinking about the particular trajectory of my own recovery. Which is perhaps not the healthiest approach, but it is what I have." She glanced at him. "Is that strange?" "No," he said. "It's exactly what I'd expect from someone who was told for 8 years that their perspective on the world was valueless. The first place you go when you recover that perspective is, where else could this perspective have been useful?" She looked at him for a long moment. "You do that?" she said. "Do what?" "Say the thing that turns the experience I am describing from a curiosity or a deficiency into something that makes sense from the outside." She paused. "It's useful." "I'm glad." "Why did you become a lawyer?" she asked. "You said you were a surgeon's assistant. That's a considerable change of direction." He told her about the injury and the years after. She listened as he spoke, with the full attention of someone who has had to be precise about listening, who has learned that what people say and what they mean can be very different, and that the gap between them is usually where the important things live. He found, as he spoke, that he was saying more than he had intended to, and that this did not feel, as it usually did, like a loss of control. It felt like something being given. When he finished, she said, "You went looking for a different kind of justice, one you had more capacity to affect." "I suppose so." "And now you are applying a surgeon's framework to law, looking for what's actually there rather than what the patient reports." He hadn't quite thought of it in those terms, but she was right. "Yes." She nodded, the decisive nod of someone filing something away. "I think that's what I want to do," she said. "Something of that kind. Look at what's actually there, in places where people have been trained to look away." "It makes enemies," Harlan said. "I know what it is to have enemies," she said. "I'd rather have them for a reason I chose." He laughed, which surprised him. It surprised her, too. He saw it in her face, the slight start, and then the consideration, and then something that was the distant ancestor of a smile. "You should do that more," she said. "Laugh?" "It changes your face," she said. "It makes you look like a person rather than an office." He considered whether to say what he was thinking, decided the deciding was itself evidence that he was overthinking it, and said it. "You make it easy." She looked at him. The expression on her face was complicated, not quite the assessment she had been running since the first day, not yet anything else, something in between. "I am going to Scotland," she said. "I will be there some time. Long enough to remember myself." "I know." "And then I will come back. Or go somewhere. I don't know yet." "I know." "I want you to write to me," she said, "if you are willing to. About the work. About what you find when you look at things properly. I think I would find it useful to be in correspondence with someone who approaches things from the inside of the system, rather than the outside." "I would like that," Harlan said. And then, because she was Eleanor Ashford, and had asked him once why he was doing this, and had expected and received an honest answer. "I would like it for reasons beyond the professional utility. I want to be transparent about that." She looked at him for a long time. "I know," she said. "I have. I am not in a state to receive that clearly yet. I think you understand that." "I understand it. But I want you to know that I find—" She stopped, tried again. "I want you to know that you are the first man in 8 years in whose presence I have felt something other than the need to manage my own safety. And I don't know what to do with that yet. But I want you to know it's true." "Thank you," he said. "That's enough. That is more than enough." She left for Scotland on a Thursday, in a carriage with her sister and a quantity of luggage that reflected, Catherine had told him, the somewhat cathartic experience of packing only the things that were genuinely hers. The morning she left, she came to his office to collect a final set of documents related to the estate, and she stood in his doorway for a moment after the documents were exchanged, and she looked at him with the full, direct assessment that he had learned was her truest expression. "Harlan," she said, the first time she had used his name. "Eleanor." "Thank you," she said. "Not for the verdict, for the looking, for not looking away. Anyone should have done it. But you did it," she said. "That's the thing that matters." She paused. "I'll write. I'll be here." She left. He stood at the window and watched the carriage go until it turned the corner and passed out of sight. and then he stood there a while longer because the room felt different without her in it. Not empty exactly, weighted differently, the way a room feels after something significant has passed through it. He went back to his desk and opened the next file. The letters began 3 weeks later. The first was careful, almost formal. A description of Scotland, of Catherine's household, of the particular quality of northern winter light that felt, she said, like being looked at honestly. Which is strange to say about weather, but I am finding strange things true lately. It ended. I have been thinking about the gap. I may write more about that when the thoughts are more organized. I am finding thoughts are slow to organize, which is either a problem or a necessary condition that I am trying to approach with patience. He wrote back the same day, about a case he had reviewed that week, about the question of what kinds of evidence courts were structurally inclined to receive and what kinds they were structurally inclined to dismiss. He ended, "Your thoughts about the gap, organized or not, would be useful to me if you want to send them." She sent them. They arrived 2 weeks later, 6 dense pages in the precise and unhurried handwriting of someone who had been composing this for some time and finally felt ready to release it. The gap she described was specific, the space between the point at which someone in proximity to harm became aware of it and the point at which they had any clear mechanism for doing something with that awareness. Physicians, servants, family members, friends. Each category had its own version of the gap, its own set of reasons to stay silent, its own set of structural obstacles. She had catalogued them, in her meticulous way, from the inside. "I am not certain yet what the use of this catalogue is," she wrote. "I know what I wanted when I was inside the situation. I wanted there to be a clear place to put the truth, a person or institution or process that had the mandate to receive it. There wasn't one. Or if there was, it wasn't visible to me, or wasn't willing. I think about Agnes saying she didn't know who to tell. I think about Stowe making his calculation about what was relevant. I think these are not personal failures, they are structural conditions. And structural conditions can be changed, given sufficient will and sufficient documentation. I have one of these, I am working on the other." Harlan read this letter twice, and then wrote back a response that was longer than his previous ones, and contained the name of a woman in London he had known for several years, who was attempting to address exactly the kind of structural gap Eleanor described, and who he thought would be interested in Eleanor's catalogue. The correspondence continued through the winter. The letters became less formal. Eleanor wrote about the process of learning to sleep without the particular vigilance she had maintained for 8 years. "My body doesn't believe yet that it can lower its guard, which I understand is a reasonable position for it to take given the evidence of the last 8 years, but it makes rest difficult." She wrote about learning to want things, food, specifically in detail, the small daily wanting that is so ordinary most people don't notice it. "I ate bread this morning because I was hungry, and I chose the bread I wanted without consulting anyone about whether my choice was appropriate, and I am fully aware that this is an absurdly ordinary thing, and I find I am not embarrassed by how significant it felt." He wrote back about ordinary things as well, deliberately. About the elm tree in the courthouse courtyard, which he had apparently been looking at during the original hearing, and which had become a kind of reference point he kept returning to. About a book he was reading. About a case that had made him angry in a productive way. In March, she wrote, "I have been corresponding with the woman you connected me to. She is remarkable. She has agreed that what I have is useful and wants to know if I would be willing to come to London in the spring and speak with some people she knows who are trying to build what I described. A place for the truth to go. I am considering it. I find I want to go. I find wanting things is still startling, and I am trying not to treat it with suspicion. He wrote back, I will be in London in April for a hearing that runs most of the month. If you come in April, I will be there. She arrived on the 12th of April. He met her at the station because it seemed simple and right, and because he had discovered over the course of the winter that he was not interested in managing his own wants into invisibility. She came through the platform gate looking entirely different from the woman who had knelt on cold stone in November. Not different in the sense of transformed, he thought, but different in the sense of recovered, the way a colour looks different when the light on it changes. The same person, more visible. She stopped when she saw him, and she smiled, which was an expression he had seen in its precursor state several times over the winter and was now fully itself. You didn't have to come to the station, she said. I wanted to, he said. Good, she said. So did I. They stood on the platform with the April light coming through the station roof and the ordinary chaos of London around them, and she held out her hand, and he took it, and they stood there for a moment in the specific, grounded way of two people who have arrived somewhere after a considerable journey and are taking a moment to confirm that they have actually arrived. I have 17 people who want to talk to me, she said. I know. I helped arrange 4 of them. I know you did. She looked at him sideways. You have been useful from a distance. You will also be useful in person. I intend to be. They walked out of the station into April, into the ongoing work of it, the work of building the place for truth to go, the work of recovery that remained non-linear and would remain so. The work of 2 people who had found each other in the aftermath of the worst that institutions could enable, and were building something from it that was not rescue and not salvation, but the particular, unglamorous, enduring thing that comes from choosing to stay present to each other's real dimensions. Eleanor Ashford, who had knelt on cold stone and waited to die and told the truth instead, was still telling the truth. She was learning to direct it where it could do the most damage. And Harlan Graves, who had almost looked away, was learning that the most important legal judgments were not the ones made in chambers. They were the ones made in corridors, early, before the proceeding began. The small private decision to look at what was actually there,